The purpose of this tutorial is to show you how you can detect different gestures on nodes or anchor nodes that you create inside Sceneform. So this can be useful for a variety of reasons. In this tutorial, what I'm first going to show you is like a very basic example in which you just put an anchor node in the scene, and you when you perform different gestures on that node, the different messages are displayed on the screen to let you know that you performed, for example, a double tap, a single tap, or a long press, and so on. It's not so difficult to do, but I realized that there weren't any tutorials out there for this sort of stuff, so I just decided to make one myself. The language that I'm going to use is Kotlin, but you can easily replicate it in Java as well. So here I'll just quickly show you what this project looks like when you run it right now. I'll put a link in the description for where you can get this code. The complete code will also be available on my GitHub, but basically I'm using the maintain version of Sceneform. It's from a guy in France called Thomas, and he and some other developers have decided to continue maintaining Sceneform even though Google discontinued it. So what I've basically done here is I've taken the sample code that they have for showing the giant panda when you tap on the plane. And so what I've done is I've just made a few changes. So I've decreased the size of the panda because it looks really big when you put it inside your room. Well, it's not meant to be shown in interior places. It's meant to be shown outside. So let me just quickly show you what it looks like. So the first thing that we need to do now is we need a gesture detector which can detect the type of gesture that we are performing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go here and create a Kotlin file, call it gesture detector, and this is going to inherit from the Android class simple on gesture listener. So now what we should do now, so we need a way to identify the different gestures. So this class, what it's going to do is it's going to keep track of the type of gesture that was performed by the user, and that gesture is what we can then gain access to in our main activity. So there are probably many ways to do this, but I will prefer doing it using enums. So let me just do that. So I'm going to do enum class. Let me call this gesture type. So right now in the beginning, the kind of gesture that I want to focus on are so the default gesture is when you have no gesture, right? So that would be just a none. And then we can have a gesture for single tap. We can also have a gesture for a double tap. And then finally we can also create a gesture for a long press. So this is where you just keep your finger pressed on the screen. Okay. Now we need a variable to store the gesture types. So by default, the gesture type will be none because in the beginning there's no gesture. And actually, so let's implement override the function that so this is the function that we will override from the simple on gesture listener, which detects the single tap. Oh, sorry, supposed to be like this. Right. So here we can, for single tap, we will use on single tap confirmed. And so when this happens, our gesture type becomes single tap. Let's do the same for double tap. And then finally, let's do the same for long press. And finally, there's one more thing that we should do is we need to also reset the gesture type. So I will explain it later on when I'm using this class in the main activity. But for now, what we also need to do is we need to reset the gesture after we have set it to a certain gesture. So let me just do that. You will understand what I mean when I start using this class in main activity. Okay, so this is it. This is going to be our gesture detector class that we will then use in main activity.kt. So now let me come here. So in order to use the gesture detector, we need something called a gesture detector compat. This is that all of this is actually mentioned on Google. So I will also link this website in the description for the video. But yeah, if you want to understand in detail how the gesture detector works and how you can use it to detect other gestures, you can basically read all of this. But I will not go into details regarding that here. The purpose of this tutorial is to just show you how you can use this method to detect gestures on anchor nodes or simple nodes in Sceneform. So what we need now is a gesture detector comp. And we also need to initialize our gesture detector. So one more step that we need to perform before we can start using the gesture detector, and that is to initialize the gesture detector compat. So I'll provide this as the context and the gesture detector. And now we're basically ready to use the gesture detector to detect gestures in our app right now. So in order to detect gestures, what we need a view, and the view is provided by AR fragment. Actually, sorry, what I meant was the view, and the view here is AR scene view. So this AR scene view, you can also gain access to it from AR fragment, but we'll just use the AR scene view that is created in this overridden function. So we need to, in order to detect gestures, we need to get the touch event and pass that touch event to the gesture detector compat, which will then enable gesture detector to know what gesture was performed. And yes, because this function also has a return value of we will return true whenever the user touches the screen. So this will allow us to know that a touch event was performed. Okay, so now let's use the gesture. Now let's pass this motion event to the gesture detector compact. And so when we do this, it will allow the gesture detector to find out what gesture was performed. And so once we know what gesture was performed, what we can do is we can then gain access we can then check from here. We can check what value this variable has, whether this variable is of single tap, whether this variable has value of single tap, double tap, or long press. And so we can basically like have a conditional statement for this, or in Kotlin we can use the when condition to deal with the multiple values for this gesture type variable. Okay, so what we've done here is we've so we now need to perform some kind of an action whenever any of these gestures is performed. In fact, let me just get rid of this and just put it in else. So here what we're going to do is right now we're just going to show a toast message. Let me just copy and paste this to do this really quickly, and we don't want it to continue. We don't want the message to show for a long period of time. And here we'll just let the user know that a single tap was performed, and we just do the same for a double tap, but remembering that this is a double tap. Same here, but this is going to be a long press. Okay, now if you remember, I said that we need to also reset the gesture type. And so the idea is that once you have consumed the touch event and you've set the value for this gesture type variable, you should then reset the gesture type so that the next time this event is triggered, a new gesture can be assigned to it. And the reason why you want to do this is because sometimes, even let's say you want to tap on the screen once, it's possible that this touch listener won't register it as a single tap event performed once, but it might register as a single tap event performed multiple times. I think in general it's a good idea to reset the gesture type after you've consumed the motion event and you've notified the user what gesture was performed. And I think we're now ready to test this out. So now how do we make this work for the node? So in our case, that's the Panda that we end up creating when we tap on the screen. So how do we differentiate between gestures that are performed anywhere on the screen and gestures that are only performed on the node, or in our case the Panda. So this is where this hit test result variable comes into place. So basically what this hit test result does is it tells us that whether, so what it does is you project a ray from forward from your camera, and this ray will tell you whether it hit a node object or not. And so if you hit a node object, what you can then do is you in our case we can just show a different toast message to let the user know that they tapped on a node. And when this hit test result object returns null, meaning that no node was hit, that means that the user just pressed somewhere on the screen and they didn't actually touch a node or any AR object in the scene. So let me just quickly show how this will work. So if it is null, that means you just pressed somewhere on the screen and you didn't actually touch any node in the in your Sceneform scene. So in this case, what we will do is we will just show the same message with a slight modification. So we'll just say that a single tap was performed. Otherwise, so this is when you did touch a Sceneform node. So that means you actually performed this gesture on a Sceneform node object. So in this case, we will say that the single tap was performed on a node. And actually, let's just do the same for all the other gestures as well. So this is a double tap, and this is the long press. Okay, let's see this in action. Okay, so let's make things a bit interesting. So let's say, for example, now when we perform the double tap on the node, we want to delete the node and the anchor to which it belongs. And when we long press on the node, what we can do is we can, let's say, make the Panda larger. So right now the Panda, let me just verify. So the Panda right now has a world scale of about, I would say, 10 centimeters along each of the axes. So let's say I want to make it like 0.4, so like 40 centimeters along each of the axes. So let me just find, okay, there we are. So let's say I want to make the node. So the node that is obtained from the hit test result, I want to make it larger. And on double tap on the node, what we want to do is we want to delete it. So also notice that you can gain access to the Sceneform node via the hit test result. So what this basically means is that you have access to this node and you can perform a bunch of actions on the node. So in order to delete the node, we need to gain access to the anchor node. and we want to detach this anchor node, the anchor for this anchor node, from our scene. And then finally we want to set the parent for this node to null. Okay, let's see how it works now.